Shabbat Shalom. Over the course of this week, there was increasing chatter and then hope that there would be a deal for a ceasefire and for the release of hostages taken from Israel. We have been praying now for 15 months. So on October 7th, 251 were dragged away from their homes, from a music festival. And then some of those had actually already been killed, and their corpses were dragged away so that they could be used as bargaining chips. And now just a little less than 100 remain. If this deal goes through, 33 will be returned home. Some alive, some already killed. In exchange for each innocent hostage, 30 prisoners will be returned, with the exception that for some of the female soldiers who were taken, it will be 50. So those 30s and 50s add up to about 1,000 people being released from Israeli jails, about 275 of which were involved in murdering Israelis. As a part of the deal as well, more aid will be allowed in, and the Israeli army may be withdrawing from certain areas in Gaza. Now this, by the way, is in no way an end to the war that is now entering its 16th month. It is perhaps 42 days. So I am not a pundit, I'm not a politician, I'm not a negotiator, I am, at least some people tell me I'm a rabbi. So what I want to try to do is offer this morning some thoughts on where we might be spiritually, where we might be ethically in this moment. And why I think for many Israelis this moment is bittersweet. The question of the hostages has torn Israel apart because bringing back captive is one of our most deeply held values. When we get up in the morning, one of the blessings we say is Matir Asurim, and we say it again in the second blessing of the Amidah, that God frees those who are held captive. And in fact, when you are collecting charity, for whatever purpose you have collected, whether it is to help the poor, to feed the hungry, to clothe the naked, to heal the sick, to build a synagogue, no matter what, you can always divert those funds in order to save someone who is held in captivity. And if you have read the reports of those who were freed, who were released in the past, you have a sense of the hellish conditions, the abuse under which they have been held. And yet the question that Israelis are asking as well is at what cost? Because amongst those who are being traded and exchanged are not innocent civilians, but people who have literally been involved in murdering others. And what happens if Israel withdraws from certain areas? Will those areas again be places from which rockets can be launched, again be areas from which new attacks can be planned? My colleague, my friend Stuart Weinblatt, shared the story of an Israeli politician named Geula Cohen. So she was a member of Knesset, and she has an amazing history. So her family came from one of the Arab countries, and she actually was part of an Israeli militia. She was involved with Lehi, with the Stern gang. So this was a group that advocated violence against the British Army to get them out of Israel a little bit sooner. And she actually in British prison as a result. And with the founding of the State of Israel, usually people go from politics to prison, not the other way. But she was one of the most right-wing Israeli politicians back in the day, and she was part of the Likud party, and in fact, at times even a party that was to the right of it. And this was during the Lebanon War. And she was asked how she would react if her son, who was serving in the IDF in Lebanon, what would she do if he was captured? What if he was being held? And by the way, there are captives who are taken in that war who have still never been returned. And she replied that if her son was taken captive, she would stand outside the Knesset and join the protesters in shouting and demanding that the government do whatever it might take to get her son released. And then, as the story goes, she said she would go inside the Knesset, she would take her seat amongst her fellow members and vote to not listen to the demonstrators outside. And so that is the conundrum that every Israeli faces at this moment. So Israel's security cabinet approved the deal, which is a smaller group of the cabinet. The larger cabinet began debating shortly before Shabbat, and normally Israel's cabinet, Israel's Knesset, do not meet on Shabbat, but in this case they paused so that members of the cabinet could light candles, and they went back to their negotiations because, again, freeing captives takes precedence over almost everything. And as of when I had to unplug on Friday afternoon, they were still debating. So how do we think about this moment as Jews or as Americans who are here, who are thousands of miles away, and who have been praying for this release now for over 15 months? A few thoughts. One is that the book of the Bible we are reading this week in English is called Exodus. In Hebrew, it's called Shmot, which means names. So when the Israelites come into Egypt, they come with names. They are Reuben, Shimon, Levi. Those who came into captivity had names. The Bibas family, Shiri, Ariel, Kfir, and Yardain. Women like Emily Damari, Rami Gordon, Doron Steinbrecht, Arbel Yehud, Liri Albag, Karina Ariev, Agam Berger, Daniela Gilboa, Nama Levi, and so many more. Ohad Ben Ami, Yitzkia Elgarat, Yair Horn, Sachi Idan, the name goes on. For these 15 months, those people have existed, if you will, without names, because captivity in Egypt is about erasing names. Pharaoh forgets who Joseph is. And by the way, Pharaoh himself does not have a name. We have the names of the pharaohs. We know there was Tutankhamun, Ramses, and so on. We think we even know which Pharaoh it was who enslaved the Israelites, but his name is not preserved. And Moses' parents, we are first told, are just a man from the house of Levi, a woman from the house of Levi. The babies thrown into the Nile were never named. Who has a name? Shiphrah and Puah, the midwives who stand up to Pharaoh. Pharaoh's daughter in the Torah is not given a name, but she is the one who gives the first name in Exodus to Moses, because the giving of names is the freeing of people. And those captive in Gaza, even though their posters are up everywhere in Israel, to the rest of the world have been nameless, and it is through the Exodus that their Shemot, their names, are returned. This has been a tough war. Part of the way that the enslavement of the Israelites started is the Israelites say, Hava nichak malo, let's be smart about this, says Pharaoh. In Deuteronomy, we read of the enslavement, Vayareu otanu hamitzrim, which literally means they were bad to us, but midrashically, metaphorically, is understood to mean they made us look bad. Before Pharaoh could enslave the Israelites, he had to demonize them. He had to make them look like enemies. He had to make them look like everything that his nation hated. And that is really the ultimate effect of this war. The goal of this war, the goal of Hamas, was to set up Israel in a no-win situation where no matter what it did, it would be demonized, where its citizens would be unwelcome, where Jews around the world would have their synagogues firebombed, their cars vandalized, would be threatened with attack wherever we go. And so the struggle that we face was that in 2015, Israel released 1,000 terrorists for one man, for Gilad Shalit. One of those released, Yahya Sinwar, was the mastermind of October 7th, and hundreds of others who were released on that day, 8 years later, were involved in that attack. And so I might ask, what is the guarantee that the same will not happen again? Now you can say there's a truce, there's a ceasefire. But I want to point out that the word's translation is tough. So there are different words in Arabic for a ceasefire, and Rabbi Bright, whose Arabic is much better than mine, can explain this to you later. But one of the words that is used is called a hudna, which is a ceasefire not with the aim of peace, but the ability to catch one's breath so that one can fight again. Not to disarm, but to rearm. Not a farewell to arms, but a lehitraot. We'll see you again soon. And so Hamas and its allies have not given up on the idea that the war against Jews is a religious obligation. So why sign a truce with an enemy that has no intention of giving up the fight? Why sign a truce with an enemy that has no intention of giving up the fight and would do it again if it had the opportunity? Why do more than 70% of Israelis want this truce? And by the way, getting more than 70% of Israelis to agree to anything is basically impossible. Some want an end to this war at any cost. Some, despite the fact that they know that this war will not end or may not end, want to get their people home. Because it's so frustrating that some of the prisoners who are being released from jail will certainly go back to terror, to murder. Some of the areas that Israel's troops are being asked to withdraw from are going to again be centers of terror activities, of launching attacks. That some of the aid that is going to be sent in will be hijacked by Hamas and used to fund its future endeavors rather than helping the people it is supposed to help. But here's the thing. If you let a murderer go, there's always a chance to take them back. If you let a rocket factory be rebuilt, you can take it down again. If aid is captured, don't send more. But you can't bring a man, a woman, a little red-headed baby back to life. In Egypt, the first plague was that the Nile turns to blood. We live in a moment where denial may lead to blood being spilled. Israel cannot let its guard down. The reason why October 7th happened is because the people who wanted to do so did it, but also because the people who are responsible for protecting Israeli lives on the other side were asleep. This deal reduces perhaps the total casualties, the total loss from October 7th. It does not necessarily make the next October 7th any less likely. That is something that Israel will continue to have to be vigilant about. What strikes me most about this deal, and in a weird way give me hope, is actually an economic argument. So here's the thing. When you are trading, if you are trading Pokemon cards, I don't know how much one is worth versus another. When the Falcons or the Braves trade players, they don't know how much is worth versus another. But the idea is that when you are making a trade, you are trying to match up equal value for equal value. And so here's the thing. Hamas, in making this deal, has said what it thinks the lives of its people are worth. So much of Gaza is a devastated wasteland. Had Hamas at any time released its 100 hostages, the war would have been over. But holding on to these 100 innocent people or their bodies is worth more to Hamas than the well-being of its entire country. In ancient Egypt, holding on to the Israelites as slaves was worth the loss of their health, worth going through the plagues against their animals, worth going through the plagues against their crops, worth their livelihoods, and indeed, the death of the firstborn, a death in every Egyptian home. Only then do the Egyptians say, "This is enough, let them go." This deal establishes, if you will, an exchange rate. It says that one Israeli baby, alive or dead, is worth a dozen, a score, 30 murderers. That's a better deal than 1,000 to 1. In our Haftorah this week, God talks about God shaking out the nations of the world like you shake out your pockets and falling amongst all the detritus, all the debris, picking up one by one the captives of Israel. That is, in some sense, what is happening at this moment. We've gone from an exchange rate of 1 to 1,000 to 1 to 30. We can begin talking about real peace when that number is 1 to 1. When those who lead on the Palestinian side place as much value on the lives of one of their own people as they do on the life of one Israeli, alive or dead. And we will know that there is real peace when there is no fire to cease, because everyone says that these lives are too valuable, and therefore there is no need for a deal. Shabbat Shalom.